back, relax, and maybe get yourself a snack. Me and you gonna have a little chat about books. Hey guys, so I am here today to talk to you about some honorary mentions for 2018. I've already recorded my favourite books of 2018, but because I read so many books in 2018, I have to do some honorary mentions because some of these books are so worth you guys reading and I couldn't quite fit them into my absolute favourites. So let me tell you a little bit about each of these books, and as always I will link my full review of these down below, so if you want to go and check out them and find out a bit more about the book, you can do that. But in the meantime, let's get started. My first honorary mention is The Poppy War by R.F. Kuang. This book is one that thoroughly enchanted and surprised me. It's very much divided into parts. So the first part is sort of a coming of age story. Then we have, well, I suppose it's a continuation of coming of age throughout the whole thing, but it starts off following a child and then she goes to school and we follow her there as she learns, and then we follow her as a warrior. And it is pretty gruesome and epic at times. It's a bit of both, and I really enjoyed the way the concept worked and the story. The magic was cool. The whole book was just cool, to be honest, guys, and I really found it fun. And I think you guys should read it. I will link my full review down below if you want to go and check out more about this. The next book that made my honourable mentions is Finland Offence by Josiah Bancroft. This book was one that I completely didn't know what to expect when reading it, but actually I completely fell in love with it. It is very weird, it's very bizarre, it's quite different from a lot of the other books that are out there at the moment, but I know it's done incredibly well in the UK in terms of just being on every bestseller table ever in Waterstones and other bookshops, it seems like. The cover stands out, the world is really cool, it's set in a tower and the people who are the main characters are kind of trying to go up the levels of the tower, but each tower is like its own world and it's completely different rules and it's madness. It's super fun. I'm currently reading the third one and really enjoying it, so very happy that I discovered this series thanks to SPFBO. It's actually originally a self-published series, although as you can see it's now picked up by Orbit, so yeah, so worth reading this series. Next up is a book that I fell in love with. It is a continuation of a series, but it's sort of a new series set in the same world, and that is A Time of Dread by John Gwynne. This book was one that I thought I would like because I really enjoyed his previous series, but the books are a little bit shorter in this series and it focuses on some of the descendants of characters in the first series. So I wasn't sure if I would completely fall in love the same way as I did with the first characters, but I did, and I think I actually enjoyed this one even more than I liked the first series so far, so I thoroughly recommend checking this series out. It is so fantastically fun and I just found all of the characters to be great, and a lot of the magic and so on is really cool. There's like giants and so on in this world and animals, and yeah, there's a lot going on and it's really enjoyable to just sit down and dive back into it. Again, I think this would fall under the sort of classic fantasy area because it does play on a lot of classic tropes, but it is actually very original and feels very fresh when you're reading it. Next up I have a science fiction one, and that is Children of Time by Adrian Tchaikovsky. This book was fantastic and super creepy all at once because I don't like spiders and they are a part of the book. However, it is so fantastic that they outweighed my fear of spiders quite quickly, because this is set in a world, or I suppose multiple worlds, where there are characters who are trying to continue the civilization of Earth after it has been destroyed. We have a character who is stuck in a spaceship. She has been there for millennium, I think, almost. She's been there thousands of years at least, in sort of cryo sleep or something like that, and she is kind of going mad. We also have characters who are actually like evolved spiders who are sentient. It's very bizarre, but it works, and that's all you kind of need to know about this. Basically, it does sound completely weird and mad, but it works really well and it's just fantastic to read. And Adrian Tchaikovsky is one of my new favourite authors this year. He just blew me away with all the books of his I've read so far, so I fully plan to pick up more of his in the coming year. Next up I have two which I audiobooked, and that is Sins of Empire and Wrath of Empire. I'm including these as sort of one entry because they are by the same author and I read them back to back,
and I loved both of them actually. I was very surprised because the previous Brian McClellan book I'd read I wasn't such a fan of, and that was the Powder Mage series. I started it, I read book 1, and I just didn't really fall in love with it, so I wasn't sure about him as an author. I left him on that series and just never came back to it, but this series just seemed to be getting a lot more hype. People seemed to enjoy it, so I picked it up, and I'm so glad I did, especially on audio, because I recommend them. Because it was so good and it was just fun. It was filled with life and vibrancy, and there's a lot of magic in this one to do with powder and mages, as the first book and series sort of suggests. There's also really interesting ideas about the societies in this one and how they mix with one another, and I just enjoyed it. I love a good book that you enjoy, and this is that. So both of these were really great. I think the second one was my favourite of them so far, so I'm really keen to sort of see what happens in the third one when that comes out. Next up, I have another self-published book, and that is The Banished Craft. This one is a story that focuses on dragons, on women, on mad societies that are suppressing people, but the main characters that we're following are going against the norm, and they are just going to power on and be epic and awesome, and I love that about this. So that book was just, I don't know, it's weird because it is different, it's self-published, it does stuff that a lot of other sort of fantasy books don't do, but I think it works, and it works incredibly well. So that one was excellent. Another self-published book that I loved was actually the one I've chosen for SBFBO, and that's The Anointed. I think I probably raved about this enough in the review I did of it, so I'll link that below. But basically it's a world where nothing can float, they have dragons, and people are just crazy. Like, there's a crazy king who's in charge of everyone, there's a society who can build boats and float things, but no one else knows they exist. They are hidden under a ring of, like, I don't know, electricity or current or something like that. There is a family who has a lot to prove, especially one of the main characters, and there's a rebellion against the king. There's also rebellion against the proxy system, where people can be reborn if they kill other people, especially babies. It's great and mad and very involved and very exciting, and I loved it. So again, I would highly recommend that one. Another one I want to recommend is actually a really short book, but I kind of want to recommend most of the books by this author because everyone I've read of them so far I've enjoyed. But this one has probably been my favourite of them so far, and that is The Midwich Cuckoos by John Wyndham. This one is my favourite of his books so far that I've read, although I've not read all of them. But I really enjoyed this one. I think it's probably my favourite because of the emotional side of it, which you don't always see quite as much in his books. I think he can be quite detached sometimes. His ideas are fascinating always from what I've read, but some of the characters I didn't quite click with, whereas this book I really did, and I really enjoyed the concept. It was so bizarre, and it was really making you think, what on earth would we do as a society if this actually happened, because it is so crazy. So I really like that about this, and I highly recommend all of his books, as I say, but this one in particular. And then my favourite of the honourable mentions that really closely didn't quite make my favourites of the year, but it's very much up there, is this one, The Deathless by Peter Newman. I am so excited to find out what is going to happen in book number 2, because this book was so fantastic. After reading The Vagrant also in 2018, and I wasn't such a fan, I was a little bit disappointed, I would say. Not quite disappointed, but I just didn't get as much from it as some people have, and I didn't quite click with it. This book is a more of a traditional fantasy. It's one that has a lot of cool elements of sort of these godlike beings who can fly, and they are called the Deathless. They are people who cannot die. They have really interesting powers and also duties, and we just follow lots of them in the society. They're all kind of embroiled in one plot or I suppose mystery that's being ongoing, and I really enjoyed seeing how they interacted with one another and the powers they displayed, and the world in general is really cool as well. So this is another one that I thoroughly recommend, and again I'm super excited for book number 2 to come out because I want to know what is going to happen next. So that is the end of my honourable mentions. Do let me know down below which of the books you read this year didn't quite make your favourites but was still so worth reading, and which of these you'll be picking up if you're intending to get to any of them. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you very soon in another video. Bye guys!
Thank you for watching my video today. Go pick up a book, then come back and chat with me again.